The Appalachian mountains stood in solemn silence, their ridges veiled by morning mist and the weight of unspoken memories. In the valley below, a narrow path wound its way to the Whitmore homestead, a lonely patch of farmland surrounded by dense oak and hickory. It was 1841, a time when every family bore its own burdens in the hollows, but the Whitmores carried something heavier, whispers of a cursed well on their land. Folks in town said the ground itself swallowed people whole, that shadows lingered there longer than they ought to. Rumor had a way of fastening itself to people like burrs on wool, and no family knew that sting more than the three Whitmore sisters. Martha Whitmore, at 24, rose each day before the sun, her hands hardened by work far greater than her years. She was the eldest, the one neighbors turned to when speaking of the Whitmores, whether in pity or suspicion. Duty clung to her like the morning fog. She remembered her father's voice telling her to keep the farm alive, even after the soil grew stubborn and her mother faded from illness. She remembered, too, how quickly trust could curdle into doubt among mountain folk. Eliza, 19, held on to her faith with quiet devotion. She found comfort in hymns and scripture, though doubt had begun creeping into her heart. Her gentle nature often placed her between Martha's fierce resolve and their youngest sister's unruly spirit. Caroline, just 15, bristled against the weight of silence that pressed upon their household. Her restless eyes strayed to the ridgelines, to the unseen world beyond the farm. Reckless curiosity often lured her to places others dared not go, especially near the stone-lined mouth of the well that the family tried hard to forget. The morning the rumors returned with sharp teeth, a neighbor failed to come home. Thomas Granger, a man known for stubborn pride and an iron will, had last been seen walking near Whitmore land. By sundown, his wife stormed into town with swollen eyes and trembling hands, saying he never reached the cabin. Whispers rose like smoke, carried on by anxious voices. The Whitmore place. The well. That cursed patch of earth. At the general store, men lowered their tones, glancing toward Reverend Josiah Hale, who stood stiff as a pine with scripture tucked under his arm. The Reverend was a stern man, his sermons carved from fire and stone. Though he spoke of salvation, his eyes often searched for sin, and he had long warned the town of God's judgment upon hidden wickedness. Now his gaze drifted toward the Whitmore sisters' farm, as though the missing man's fate lay beneath their soil. Back at the homestead, Martha labored over the fields, but her thoughts grew heavy with unease. She caught Caroline lingering near the well, tracing her fingers over the weathered stones. "Caroline," Martha snapped, her voice edged with warning. "You stay clear of that place. Ain't nothing down there but trouble." Caroline's chin lifted in defiance, though her eyes flickered with unease. "If there's nothing, then why does everyone act like it's the mouth of hell itself?" Eliza, standing near with a basket of kindling, whispered, "Don't speak that way. We've enough burdens without bringing more upon us." The sisters fell quiet, the air thick with tension, broken only by the distant caw of a crow. Martha turned away, her jaw tight, but the question hung in the air. Even she could not deny the way people's gazes lingered on them in town, the way conversations hushed when she passed. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and shadows stretched long across the valley, Martha stood on the porch staring toward the well. The stones caught the fading light, a circle of silence in the earth that seemed to breathe with secrets. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, and she wondered if Thomas Granger had ever made it past their land. The mountains had always been keepers of stories, but some tales lay buried too deep, waiting for restless hands to stir them. And so the whispers grew louder, wrapping around the Whitmore sisters' lives, promising to draw them into a truth far darker than rumor. If you've been drawn in by the mysteries that linger in these mountains, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are many more secrets waiting to be unearthed, and you won't want to miss the next chapter of this haunting tale. The days following Thomas Granger's disappearance weighed heavily on the Whitmore farm. Even before the whispers spread through the settlement, the land itself had been unkind, as though it shared in the suspicions cast upon the family. The soil was rocky and thin, stubborn against the plough, forcing Martha to push harder with every furrow. Each season seemed to demand more from them, yet yield less as though the earth kept a secret grudge. Martha rose before dawn, her breath steaming in the chill as she hitched the mule and dragged the blade through reluctant ground. Sweat gathered on her brow even in the cool morning, her muscles aching from endless labor. But she refused to bend. This farm, no matter how cruel the land, was all that tied the Whitmores to dignity. Eliza moved quietly through the cabin, gathering wood, boiling water, humming hymns beneath her breath. The sound was gentle, almost prayerful, but Martha noticed how her sister's eyes lingered on the ridge beyond, as if she, too, feared what gossip might come crawling down the mountain. Caroline, restless as ever, darted between chores and distractions. She lingered near the well more than she should, often with a stone in hand to toss into its hollow depths. The splash echoed back with an eerie hollowness, as though the well itself carried a voice, mocking or warning. It was hard to tell. One afternoon, as the sisters gathered what little corn their patch had offered, the air turned thick with the sound of approaching hooves. A wagon rattled along the narrow track, carrying Ezra Pike, a merchant who traded salt, cloth, and rumor in equal measure. He reined his horse by the fence and called out, "Martha Whitmore, I heard tell the soil's thin up here, but it seems the whispers grow thicker than weeds." Martha wiped her brow with the back of her hand, unwilling to show offense, though the sting in his words bit deep. "We grow what the Lord allows, same as anyone, and we don't live off whispers." Ezra chuckled, though his eyes scanned the property with a calculating glint. "Best hope the Lord's with you, then. Town folk don't forget a story once it's in their mouths. Cursed land's harder to sell than barren ground." With that he flicked the reins, leaving a trail of dust. Caroline muttered, "Vultures." "That's all they are." Eliza frowned. "Hush, Carrie, don't give them more reason to speak against us." But Martha's silence spoke louder than either sister's words. She felt the burden of every rumor pressing upon her, as if the weight of the land's poor yield and the well's shadow were her personal failings. That evening a red glow settled over the mountains as the sun dipped low. The sisters sat by the hearth, their meal modest, cornbread, beans, and little else. Conversation was sparse until Caroline broke the silence, her voice restless. "Why do we let them tell our story? Why not show them we've got nothing to hide?" Martha's jaw tightened. "Because once a man's mind is set, no proof will move it. We keep to ourselves. We endure." Eliza's voice was softer, almost pleading. "Endure for how long, Martha? Until every man in town looks at us with suspicion?" Martha set her cornbread down with more force than she intended. "Until it passes. That's how it's always been." The silence that followed carried the unspoken truth. Rumors never truly passed in these mountains. They lingered like smoke caught in rafters, refusing to clear. Later, when the night had quieted the land, Caroline slipped out under the guise of gathering more wood. Drawn as though by some invisible pull, she approached the well. The stones glistened faintly in the moonlight, slick with dew. Kneeling, she traced her fingers over markings carved faintly into the rock, lines and scratches long worn by time. She couldn't read them, but she knew they were not random. Someone at some time had left their sign upon this place. A shiver ran through her as the wind stirred, carrying the distant sound of a dog's bark. She stepped back quickly, her heart thudding. Whatever secrets the well held, it was no ordinary hole in the ground. She returned quietly to the cabin, but the image of those markings lingered in her thoughts, pressing upon her like a secret begging to be spoken. And so the burdens of the land were no longer only the soil and the whispers. It was the weight of something hidden waiting to be unearthed. The town of Mill Creek gathered that week in the single-room church, the air thick with the mingled scents of pine resin from the rough-hewn walls and the damp wool of coats hung near the door. It was Sunday, yet there was little peace in the congregation. The benches creaked beneath the weight of restless bodies, and whispers flowed like an undercurrent beneath the Reverend's stern voice. Reverend Josiah Hale stood tall at the pulpit, his eyes sharp as flint. His sermon that morning spoke of hidden sins and God's watchful gaze, but it was plain to all who sat in the room that his words were directed less toward heaven and more toward the Whitmore sisters. When he thundered, "What festers in darkness will be brought to light," his gaze lingered upon Martha, who sat at the end of a bench with her sisters pressed close. Martha's back was straight, her chin high, though she felt every eye upon her. Eliza fidgeted with her prayer book, her lips moving in silent petitions while Caroline's jaw tightened in defiance. She whispered under her breath, "He preaches against us more than for the Lord." "Hush," Martha murmured, her voice low but firm. "Do not give them cause." After the sermon ended, townsfolk gathered outside, their voices rising with tension. Some spoke of Thomas Granger's disappearance, others mentioned the old well that sat on Whitmore land. The words "cursed ground" and "unholy place" slipped through the crowd with sharp edges. Reverend Hale approached Martha as she and her sisters stepped onto the dirt road. His tall frame cast a shadow across her. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice heavy with authority, "it would ease the town's burden if you allowed men of good standing to search your land. Darkness cannot endure where truth is welcome." Martha met his gaze squarely. "Reverend, we've nothing to hide, but my father built that farm with his own hands, and I'll not see strangers trample it on rumors alone." Eliza tugged gently at her sister's sleeve, whispering, "Martha, perhaps it would show goodwill." But Martha cut her off. "Goodwill will not fill their bellies with truth, Eliza. They've chosen already what they wish to believe." Reverend Hale's lips pressed into a thin line. "The Lord's patience is long, but men's is not. Consider well your choice." With that, he turned, his black coat billowing in the mountain breeze as he walked away. The sisters remained silent until Caroline broke the hush with a bitter laugh. "He speaks of patience while he sharpens his knife. He wants nothing but power over us." Eliza shook her head, her eyes glistening. "He seeks order, not power. If we have nothing to fear, why not let them look?" Martha felt the weight pressing down from both sides, the Reverend's authority and her sister's conflicting loyalties. Inside, her stomach twisted, but her face remained resolute. "Because once they step foot on our land in judgment, they will never stop digging. A farm cannot grow under suspicion." The walk back to the farm was quiet, save for the crunch of boots on gravel. Along the way, they passed two men leaning on a fence, their eyes following the sisters with open suspicion. One spat into the dirt and muttered, "Mark my words, that well'll be the end of them." At home, the unease lingered. The cabin's warmth could not drive away the chill that settled in Martha's chest. She sat by the table, staring at her calloused hands, hearing again Hale's warning, "Men's patience is not long." Caroline slammed a book shut and leaned against the wall. "Let them come. If they want to peer into that hole, let them see it's nothing but mud and stone." Eliza's voice trembled. "And if it's not?" The question hung heavy, and for the first time Martha had no answer. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of suspicion, like the air before a storm. The sisters retreated to bed, but sleep did not come easily. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint creak of old branches. The mountains seemed to listen, as if waiting for the Whitmores to falter. And in Martha's heart, the truth weighed heavier than any stone. Once suspicion had taken root, it grew deeper than the strongest oak. The Whitmore cabin creaked under the strain of another cold night. Wind pressed against the shutters, and the mountains seemed to breathe around them, dark and unyielding. Inside, the sisters gathered close to the hearth, their faces lit by flickering firelight. It was in moments like this that their bond, woven from grief, duty, and stubborn love, showed itself most clearly, though not always without friction. Martha gazed into the flames, her thoughts circling like restless crows. She remembered the night their father never returned from the ridge. He had gone to cut timber and was found days later, lifeless at the bottom of a ravine. No one knew if it was accident or something darker. Their mother, already frail from sickness, followed him to the grave within the year, leaving Martha to hold the farm and her sisters together, with hands too young for such burdens. Caroline, sprawled on the rug with a quilt wrapped about her, broke the silence. "Pa never would have left us with nothing. He must have known about that well." Martha's head snapped toward her. "Don't you put that on him. He worked every inch of this land for us." "But why leave it there?" Caroline pressed, her voice sharp with youthful impatience. "Why not cover it over if it was nothing but trouble? Folks say he dug it himself." Eliza's soft voice entered, barely above the crackle of the fire. He told Ma it was dug long before his time. He said he hated it, but the stones were set too deep to pull apart. Her eyes lowered, sadness dimming them. He believed some places carry shadows longer than men's lives. Martha's jaw tightened. Then let it stay buried. Talking about it brings no good. But Caroline would not let go. You can't bury questions, Martha. They rise up like weeds. The argument simmered until the wind howled through the gaps in the boards, silencing them all. Martha rose and pulled the latch tighter on the door, her heart beating faster at the thought of the neighbors' whispers creeping through the night like smoke. The next day work filled the hours, but unease lay just beneath the surface. While Martha split wood behind the cabin, Caroline wandered near the edge of the property. She stopped when she overheard two townsmen talking on the trail, their voices carried by the breeze. "She'll not hold that place much longer," one said. "Mark me, the council will make her open it up." "And when they do," the other replied, "there'll be truth enough to bury the whole lot of them." Caroline's hands clenched into fists, her chest tight with anger. She ran back to the cabin, breathless, and burst through the door. "They're planning something. The men in town. They're waiting to force us." Eliza gasped, dropping the bowl she had been washing. Martha set aside the axe and listened, her expression unreadable. "They'll not drive us from our land," she said firmly. "If they come, we'll stand as one. No one will speak against us unless we allow it." Eliza, wringing her hands, whispered, "But what if they're right? What if the well does hold some evil?" Martha turned to her, eyes blazing with the fire of both love and defiance. "It doesn't matter what's in that well. What matters is that we are Whitmores. This farm is blood and bone, and will not surrender it to fear." The sisters stood in tense silence, bound by the weight of their family's name. The wind outside died down, leaving only the sound of their breaths mingling in the dim cabin. They knew the town's suspicion was no passing thing. It pressed closer each day, threatening to split them apart. Yet in that moment, despite their quarrels, they drew strength from the only truth they had left: their blood, their land, and the promise to endure together. Still, as night fell, Caroline's thoughts returned to the strange sounds she had heard near the well, scratches in the dark, whispers she couldn't name. And though Martha's words had been strong, Caroline wondered if even blood and bone could hold against the shadows waiting beneath the earth. The morning began like any other, but the silence of the valley felt heavier, stretched thin, as if waiting to be torn. Martha sensed it before she saw anything, a stillness in the air that pressed on her chest. She was gathering kindling near the edge of the yard when the sound of boots crunching gravel reached her ears. Looking up, she saw a small band of men advancing through the trees, Ezra Pike among them, and two others with axes strapped to their backs. At their front strode Reverend Hale, his black coat stark against the pale autumn light. Martha's breath quickened. She set the wood aside and stepped forward, calling sharply, "You've no business here." Reverend Hale raised his hand in a gesture meant to calm, though his eyes burned with resolve. "Miss Whitmore, the council has agreed. For the peace of Mill Creek, the well must be searched. If there is nothing, your name will be cleared." Caroline rushed from the cabin, her face flushed. "You can't just walk onto our land like it belongs to you," Ezra Pike sneered. "This land's long held more questions than corn. You ought to be grateful we aim to answer them." Martha stood her ground, shoulders squared, though fear clawed at her ribs. "My father built this farm. You'll not trample it with your suspicions." One of the men stepped forward, resting a hand on his axe. "We aim to dig truth, not soil." Eliza appeared in the doorway, pale as linen, her hands trembling. "Martha, maybe if they look, it will end. Maybe then we'll have peace." Martha turned sharply. "Peace doesn't come by opening our doors to wolves." The men brushed past her protest, their boots sinking into the damp earth as they made for the well. Martha moved to block them, but Reverend Hale's voice rang with authority. "Step aside. If you resist, you place yourself against not only the council, but the will of God." Her throat tightened, rage and helplessness warring within her. Finally, she stepped back, fists clenched, knowing she could not stop them all. The men worked swiftly, lowering a rope into the dark mouth of the well. The pulley groaned as one of them descended, lantern light flickering against the stone. Minutes stretched like hours. Martha stood rigid, her eyes fixed on the black opening, every muscle taut. Caroline's nails dug into her palm as she clutched her sister's hand, whispering, "They'll see it's nothing, you'll see." At last the rope strained upward. The man emerged, his face grim, a bundle in his arms. When he set it down, the crowd that had gathered behind gasped. Bones, sun-bleached and fragile, clattered onto the earth. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Ezra crouched, lifting a skull. He turned it in his hands, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "Animal," he announced. "Goat, maybe." Old as the hills. The tension broke into murmurs, half relief, half suspicion. Reverend Hale's face remained stern, his eyes shifting toward Martha. Perhaps today it is beasts, but who can say what else lies deeper? Caroline stepped forward, her voice sharp with indignation. "You found nothing, yet you'll still hang it round our necks." Ezra dropped the skull with a hollow crack. "Nothing can't ease a man's fear, girl. Fear don't need proof to bite." The men gathered their tools and left, but the damage was done. Their intrusion had planted new seeds of doubt, and the townsfolk who lingered whispered among themselves, casting glances at the sisters, as though the well had breathed some curse upon them. When the yard finally emptied, Martha stood staring at the broken bones left behind, her body trembling though she fought to appear strong. Eliza touched her arm gently. "Sister, maybe this was only the beginning." Martha's voice was low, steady as a blade. "Then let it come. Whatever they seek to bury us with, we will endure." But as the sisters carried the fragments away, the well loomed behind them, silent and dark, as if mocking their fragile hope. The days after the intrusion carried a strange quiet, as though the mountains themselves held their breath. Yet inside the Whitmore cabin, silence was not peace, it was distance. The sisters moved through their chores like shadows, their words measured, their glances heavy with unspoken things. Martha rose before dawn as always, though the soil seemed harder beneath her plough and the air sharper against her skin. She drove herself harder, hoping that labor might drown the anger boiling in her chest. No matter what the men had found or failed to find, their trespass had carved a wound into her pride. She could still hear the creak of the rope, the thud of bones on the earth, the Reverend's warning voice echoing like judgment. Eliza tended the hearth in silence, her face pale as the ashes she stirred. She prayed more often now, her whispered petitions threading through the cabin like fragile threads of hope. Yet her prayers carried a tone of doubt, as if she feared the Lord himself might turn his gaze away from their farm. At night, she stared into the flames, wondering if obedience to the Reverend's counsel might have spared them further suspicion. Caroline, restless as a trapped bird, spent long hours wandering near the woods, her eyes drawn again and again toward the well. She carried a slingshot, snapping stones into the trees, as if each strike might silence the voices that haunted her thoughts. When she returned, her cheeks flushed, she spoke little, though her gaze betrayed the questions burning inside her. The tension finally broke one evening, when Martha found Caroline sitting near the well, tracing the stone markings with her fingers. "I told you to stay away," Martha said sharply, her voice cutting through the dusk. Caroline lifted her chin. "And I told you questions don't stay buried. What if there's more down there, more than they saw?" Martha's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter. The deeper they dig, the deeper they'll find ways to condemn us. I won't feed their fire." Eliza stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Martha, maybe Caroline's right. If the truth lies at the bottom, perhaps showing it would bring peace." Martha turned on her with sudden fury. "Peace? You saw what happened. They brought bones of beasts and called it proof enough to condemn us. Do you think they'll stop if we hand them more?" The sisters fell into silence, but the divide between them deepened like a crack in stone. In the days that followed, Reverend Hale began visiting more often. His tall figure appeared at their fence line, his words cloaked in piety but edged with control. He lingered near Eliza, speaking of faith and obedience, of how the town looked to her example. Eliza, torn between loyalty to Martha and her own yearning for acceptance, listened with downcast eyes. One afternoon, as Hale departed, Caroline muttered bitterly, "He doesn't come for prayers, he comes to tighten his grip." Eliza's cheeks flushed. You judge too quickly. He offers guidance when all others turn from us. And what guidance has he given? Caroline shot back. To bow our heads and let them tear us apart? Martha's voice cut through the argument, low and weary. Enough. We cannot waste our strength fighting each other. But even as she spoke, she felt the hollow ache in her chest. The Reverend's presence had planted doubt between them, and doubt was more dangerous than any rumor. That night the cabin lay still, each sister awake in her own silence. Martha stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the Reverend's words, her father's absence, the weight of the farm. Eliza clutched her Bible, whispering prayers that faltered on her tongue. Caroline lay restless, her eyes burning as she thought of the markings on the well stones, convinced they were more than mere scratches. The mountains outside seemed vast and indifferent, their dark ridges swallowing the moonlight. And though the sisters were bound by blood, the silence that now stretched between them felt deeper than the well itself. Autumn deepened across the mountains, painting the ridges in russet and gold, but the beauty of the season brought no comfort to the Whitmores. The air carried a sharper edge, as if the land itself braced for what was to come. Whispers still circled in Mill Creek, carried from porch to porch, but now they took on a darker tone, heavy with talk of the Whitmore well. One afternoon, Eliza walked to fetch herbs from the midwife Agnes Macready, who lived in a weathered cabin on the far edge of the valley. Agnes had tended births and deaths for near 40 years, her memory long as the mountain ridges. Her eyes, sharp despite her age, studied Eliza with something between pity and warning. You Whitmore girls are strong stock, Agnes said as she ground willow bark. But strong stock don't always escape old curses. That well of yours has troubled folk longer than you've been alive. Eliza stiffened. Curses are the talk of fearful men. My father said it was only a hole dug too deep. Agnes shook her head, her voice low. Long before your father, children went missing round those woods. Hunters too. Folks whispered about a pit that swallowed men whole. Some claimed to hear cries from it when the wind was still. Your pa wasn't the first to despise that well, nor will you be the last. Eliza clutched the basket tighter, unease prickling her skin. And yet you speak of it so plain. The old woman's eyes softened. Because the truth never stays buried. You can pray over it, you can throw stones to cover it, but one day it rises back. Mark me, child, something waits down there. That night, Eliza repeated Agnes's words to her sisters. Martha frowned, her expression hard. She fills your head with stories meant to keep children from wandering, nothing more. But she's lived long enough to know what others won't speak, Eliza replied. If she says the well has history, I believe her. Caroline's eyes lit with restless energy. Then I was right. It isn't just a hole. There's something beneath. Martha slammed her palm on the table, the sound startling them both. No more talk of it. This family will not be ruled by rumors. But Caroline's resolve burned brighter with every dismissal. That very night, unable to quiet her thoughts, she took a rope and lantern and crept to the well. The moon hung low, clouds drifting like torn cloth across its pale light. Her hands trembled as she tied the rope around the old post, her breath quick with fear and defiance. Lowering herself into the shaft, the cold stones pressed close on either side. The smell of damp earth and rot thickened as she descended. Her lantern threw trembling shadows across the walls, revealing faint scratches that wound downward, marks that seemed too deliberate to be accidents of nature. Her heart pounded louder than the creak of the rope. Halfway down, her boot struck something wedged in the stones. She steadied the lantern and froze. A scrap of fabric clung to the rock, faded, weather-worn, but unmistakably human. She reached out with shaking fingers and tugged. The cloth tore away easily, brittle with age. Beneath it, caught in a crack, she glimpsed the curve of bone. Caroline's breath hitched. She clutched the lantern tight and scrambled upward, rope biting her palms. When she hauled herself over the edge, her chest heaved with both terror and triumph. She pressed the scrap of fabric to her chest, whispering into the night, I knew it. By the time she crept back inside, Martha was waiting, arms folded, eyes blazing with fury. Where have you been? Caroline's hand shook as she held out the torn cloth. Down there, I found proof. People have been in that well. Eliza gasped, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. Martha snatched the scrap, her face pale, her voice sharp. "You fool, do you know what you've done?" Caroline lifted her chin, defiant despite her fear. "I've done what you wouldn't. I've faced the truth." The three sisters stood frozen in the flickering firelight, the weight of history pressing upon them. For the first time, the whispers of the past had taken form, and none of them could look at the well or each other the same again. The cabin walls seemed to close in around the sisters as Caroline laid the torn scrap of fabric on the table. The lamplight revealed its frayed edges, the weave worn thin, but it was enough to change everything. Eliza's face paled as if she had seen a ghost. Martha stood rigid, her hands planted firmly on the wood, her eyes fixed on the cloth as though it might leap to life and accuse them. "You don't know what this means," Martha said at last, her voice sharp with fear. Caroline's chin lifted. "I know enough. It wasn't just goats or cattle down there. It was people," Eliza whispered, her voice trembling. "Lord, preserve us." Her fingers traced the cross that hung from her neck. "If the Reverend learns of this—" "That's exactly why he mustn't," Martha cut in. "If Hale finds out, the whole town will descend upon us. They'll tear the farm apart stone by stone until nothing's left." Caroline's eyes flashed. "And what then? Do we pretend it isn't there? Do we hide it like Pa did? All these years we've been living above graves, Martha, don't you see? The land itself bears witness." The words struck deeper than she intended. Martha turned sharply, her jaw tight, but in her silence lay truth she could not deny. Their father's shadow hung heavier than the smoke that filled the rafters, heavier than the whispers that gnawed at the town. Eliza's voice, soft but firm, broke the tension. "We can't carry this alone. The Reverend should know. The town should know." Martha spun toward her, anger flashing. "And watch them call us murderers. Watch them strip our land and cast us out." "No, Eliza. That's not salvation. It's ruin." The argument burned through the night until a sudden storm swept across the valley. Rain hammered the roof, wind howled against the shutters, and thunder rolled like the anger of the mountains themselves. Trapped inside, the sisters' words rose louder, tangled in fear and love. "You think silence will save us," Caroline cried over the roar of the storm. "But silence is what cursed us in the first place." Martha's voice broke, raw with emotion. "And what would you have me do? Watch the only piece of our parents' blood be swallowed by the town's judgment?" For the first time Eliza raised her voice, her hands trembling but her gaze steady. "And what of judgment before God? If 19 souls lie beneath us, their cries are not silenced by our fear. They'll rise against us whether men see them or not." The storm raged on, rattling the cabin as though the mountains themselves echoed her words. Martha sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. Memories of their father surged. His weary eyes, his silence when asked about the well, the way he would turn his back to it as though it shamed him. Perhaps he had known. Perhaps he had chosen silence too. Caroline placed the fabric scrap back into Martha's hands. Her voice softened, though it carried steel beneath. "We can't run from it. Whatever lies at the bottom, we face it together." For a long moment the only sound was the storm. Then Martha lowered her hands, her face pale but her eyes burning with grim resolve. "If truth is what you want, truth is what you'll have. But mark me, it will cost us dearly." The sisters fell quiet, bound not by agreement but by inevitability. The storm outside passed slowly, leaving the valley drenched and silent. Yet within the cabin the storm had only begun. The secret was no longer hidden. It was alive, demanding to be unearthed. The storm passed, leaving the air heavy with damp earth and the faint smell of pine washed clean by rain. But inside the Whitmore cabin the storm lingered. The sisters moved quietly, their words clipped, their gazes averted. Each carried the weight of the fabric scrap Caroline had found, though Martha had hidden it in a chest beneath her bed. Secrets could be tucked away, but they did not stop whispering. It was on the third day after the storm that Reverend Hale returned. His tall frame darkened the doorway, and though his tone was polite, his presence carried the weight of judgment. "Martha," he said, his voice steady as a hammer. "I come not to accuse, but to guide. The town is restless. Fear grows like rot in a beam. If you would clear your name, you must allow the light of truth upon your land." Martha met his gaze, her chin firm, though her heart raced. "You have already searched. You found nothing but beasts, yet the whispers only grow louder. What more do you want, Reverend?" His eyes narrowed. "What God requires is obedience. Suspicion festers when secrecy reigns. You would ease your sister's burden if you yielded to the will of the community." At that, Eliza stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly around her prayer book. Her voice trembled but carried conviction. "Reverend, I believe perhaps you are right. Perhaps only truth can free us." Martha turned to her, eyes flashing. "Eliza, do not—" But Hale cut across, his voice low and persuasive. "Your gentleness is your strength, child. The Lord favors those who walk in honesty. If your family would but trust me, I would shield you from the town's worst anger." Caroline laughed bitterly, arms crossed. "Shield us? You mean control us? You want the well opened? Because you know it gives you power." The Reverend's eyes fixed on her, his jaw tightening. "Recklessness is the devil's foothold, girl. It is pride that blinds you to God's will." Caroline stepped closer, defiance burning in her voice. "And whose will is it really, Reverend? God's or yours?" The silence that followed pressed heavy on them all. Hale's gaze shifted back to Martha, measuring her resolve. "Your sisters look to you. You may think your silence is strength, but silence can be the cruelest sin of all." After he left, the cabin felt colder than the rain outside. Martha paced the floor, her hands clenched into fists. "He means to break us, to set us against each other until we bend." Eliza sank into a chair, her voice soft, almost pleading. "He only asks for honesty. Can't you see, Martha? Hiding what we found will only deepen their hatred. I feel it in my prayers. God won't bless us if we bury the truth." Caroline slammed her hand against the table. "And what then? Do we hand them bones and let them call us murderers? They'll not care about the truth. They'll only care that it came from our land." The sisters' voices clashed, rising like the storm they had endured days before. Martha's chest ached with the weight of their division. She knew Hale had planted seeds, and they were already sprouting. Eliza's loyalty bending toward him, Caroline's fury sharpening into recklessness. When at last the house fell quiet, Martha stood at the window staring out at the shadowed hills. She whispered to herself words neither sister could hear. "Father, what did you hide from us? And how long can I keep it buried?" The mountains gave no answer, only the sigh of wind through the trees carrying the Reverend's warning like an echo. The air grew colder as October settled over the mountains, the nights stretching longer, darker, heavier with dread. The Whitmore cabin stood like a lone sentinel in the valley, its windows glowing faintly against the consuming dark. Inside, the sisters lived with the strain of Reverend Hale's visits and the rising hostility of the town. Words had been spoken, suspicions sharpened, and silence no longer felt like safety. Caroline, restless beyond bearing, reached her breaking point. One evening, after the fire had burned low and Martha had dozed in her chair, she stole away with a lantern and coil of rope. The well drew her like a moth to flame. She could not abide another night haunted by the thought of bones waiting in the earth. Her boots crunched softly over the frost-stiffened ground. The lantern flame quivered in the autumn wind as she tied the rope around the same weathered post, its wood scarred from decades of storms. Her hands shook, but her jaw was set. She lowered herself into the shaft, her breath echoing against the stone walls. The deeper she went, the colder the air became, heavy with the stench of damp soil and something fouler, decay long hidden. She steadied the lantern, its light flickering over jagged scratches etched into the stone, lines too deliberate to be chance. The sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere unseen. Then her boot struck something solid. She swung the lantern closer and her breath caught. Beneath the muck and shadow lay bones, pale arcs of rib, a hollow skull staring up from the darkness, not one, but several, tangled together as though abandoned in haste. Caroline's chest tightened. Her throat burned with the urge to scream, but fear clamped her voice silent. Her hands trembled violently as she reached to steady the lantern. "Dear God," she whispered, the words trembling from her lips. "It's true." Above, a voice rang out, sharp, frantic. "Caroline!" Martha's face appeared at the mouth of the well, her silhouette haloed by lamplight. Her voice carried fear that shook the air. "What in heaven's name are you doing?" Caroline clung to the rope, her voice breaking. "They're here, Martha, bones, not beasts, people!" Martha's heart pounded as she braced the rope, her hands raw against the coarse fibers. "Climb, now!" Caroline scrambled upward, her arms straining, legs scraping against the stone as though the well itself sought to keep her. When she finally reached the top, Martha seized her by the arms and hauled her over the edge. The two collapsed onto the ground, the lantern rolling aside. Caroline's chest heaved, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Martha gripped her shoulders hard, her voice fierce but unsteady. "You could have been killed. You could have never come back up." Caroline shook her head, thrusting a trembling hand toward the shaft. "You don't understand. They're down there, many of them, not one, not two. I saw skulls, I saw ribs." Martha swallowed hard, her gaze drifting toward the black mouth of the well. Her stomach turned, but she forced herself to look away. No one must know. Not yet. "If they hear of this, they'll destroy us before the truth is even told." Caroline met her eyes, anger and desperation mingling in her voice. "Then we're no better than Pa. He knew. He hid it. And now you would too?" Martha's voice faltered. "I only mean to protect us. I only mean to keep this family whole." The sisters sat in silence, the cold seeping into their bones, the night pressing close around them. Above, the stars shone clear, indifferent to the secrets unearthed below. For the first time, Martha felt her strength falter. The truth had risen undeniable, and even she could no longer pretend it was buried. The well had given up its dead, and the reckoning had only begun. The news spread faster than fire in dry brush. The council had summoned the Whitmore sisters. Word reached them through Ezra Pike, who delivered the message with a smirk, his voice heavy with satisfaction. "Tomorrow at the meeting house. The council wants answers, and you best come ready to speak." Martha watched him ride away, her stomach twisting. She had known this day would come, but not so soon. The discovery in the well weighed heavier now, pressing against her chest with every breath. She could feel her sister's eyes on her, waiting for her to lead them into a storm no one could escape. The next morning the town gathered in the meeting house, a rough-hewn structure smelling of smoke and damp wool. Lanterns burned low, casting long shadows on the walls. The councilmen sat at a table up front, 5 men, stern-faced and weary with the burden of judgment. At their center stood Reverend Hale, his black coat draped like a mantle of authority. The sisters entered together, the room falling into hush. Martha led with her chin high, though her heart hammered. Eliza followed, her prayer book clutched tight, lips moving with silent petitions. Caroline strode last, eyes burning with defiance, her hands balled into fists. Councilman Jameson, a broad man with a weathered face, spoke first. "The Whitmore farm has stood long, but so have the whispers around it. Now with Thomas Granger missing and the well-stirring talk again, we demand truth. What lies beneath that ground?" Martha steadied her breath. "What lies there is none of our making. My father worked that land honest, and we've lived by the sweat of our hands. You searched already. You found nothing but beasts." Murmurs rippled through the room. Reverend Hale raised a hand, silencing them. His voice rang clear. "Yet rumors persist, and some say the Whitmore girls hold more knowledge than they admit." His eyes fixed on Caroline. Caroline felt the weight of his stare, but she stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Then hear it plain. I went down that well. I saw what lies at the bottom. Bones. Human bones." Gasps filled the hall. A woman covered her mouth. A man muttered, "Lord have mercy." The councilmen exchanged grim looks. Hale's eyes gleamed, though his face remained solemn. Councilman Jameson leaned forward. "You're certain? You saw with your own eyes?" Caroline nodded fiercely. "Ribs, skulls, more than one." Whoever they weren't animals. They were people thrown away like refuse. The murmurs swelled into shouts. "Murderers!" someone cried. Another voice spat. "Cursed land!" Martha raised her voice above the din, her tone sharp as steel. "We did not put them there. Those bones are older than us, older than our father. We are no killers. We've only tended the soil left to us." Hale lifted his hand again and silence fell. Older perhaps, but hidden still. And hidden things rot the soul. For the safety of this town, I say the land must pass from Whitmore hands. Only then may peace return. Eliza's voice cracked as she pleaded, "Reverend, please, we are not enemies of Mill Creek. We've borne the same losses, the same hunger as every family here." But Hale's gaze was fixed, immovable. "Sometimes sacrifice is required. The question is whether you will surrender willingly or force the town to take what it must." The sisters stood together, the weight of the room pressing down like stone. Martha's chest burned with rage, Eliza's heart ached with fear, and Caroline's defiance seared hot in her veins. They could feel the judgment of the town upon them, heavy as a noose. For the first time, it was no longer rumor, but proclamation. The Whitmores stood at the edge of ruin, and only their choices would decide whether they fell. The sisters returned from the council with heavy hearts, their steps echoing hollow against the valley road. The town's judgment clung to them like smoke, impossible to wash away. Martha walked in silence, jaw set, fury boiling beneath her calm exterior. Eliza whispered prayers under her breath, her eyes wet, while Caroline kicked stones into the ditch, her defiance burning hotter with each step. That night, the valley held an unnatural stillness. Even the crickets seemed hushed, as though the land itself braced for what was coming. Martha sat awake by the fire, unable to rest, when the acrid scent of smoke stung her nose. She shot upright. Outside, a dull glow flickered against the dark ridgeline. "Caroline! Eliza!" she cried, throwing open the door. The sisters rushed out to see flames licking at the far corner of their fields. The barn roof crackled as sparks leapt upward, embers carried on the wind. Caroline's face blanched, rage overtaking her fear. "They've done this. The townsmen. They mean to drive us out." Martha grabbed a bucket, her voice sharp. "No time for blame. Water now!" They fought desperately, drawing water from the creek, their hands blistered and raw as they heaved bucket after bucket against the fire. Sparks rained down, singeing their skirts and hair. Eliza stumbled, coughing through the smoke, but Martha pulled her back to her feet. "Stay with me, Eliza," Martha shouted. "Don't falter now." The flames roared, devouring the dry wood of the barn, but the sisters refused to yield. Caroline's voice broke as she screamed against the night. "This is our land. You won't take it from us." She hurled water with such force it splashed back across her face, streaking with soot and tears. Neighbors gathered at a distance, their silhouettes faint in the glow. Some whispered, some turned away, unwilling to help. Only one man approached with a bucket, tossing water onto the fire before retreating quickly, fear pulling him back into the shadows. When at last the flames subsided, the barn stood half-collapsed, blackened beams jutting like broken ribs against the sky. The sisters sank to the ground, their bodies trembling, lungs seared by smoke. Eliza clutched her cross, tears streaking her soot-stained face. "They'll never stop. As long as the well stands, as long as we live here, they'll come for us again." Caroline's eyes blazed through her tears. "Then we fight harder. We show them we'll not be broken." Martha stared at the ruins, her heart pounding. For years she had carried the weight of duty, of land, of family, but now she felt it slipping like ash between her fingers. The fire had taken more than timber and tools. It had burned away the illusion of safety. She rose slowly, her voice low but fierce. "They think we'll bend. They think fear will drive us, but we are Whitmores. This land is carved from our blood, and no flame will steal it from us." Eliza looked at her with trembling eyes. "And if it costs us our lives?" Martha's gaze hardened as she stared into the dying embers. "Then better we burn with it than surrender to their lies." The sisters sat in silence, the night pressing close around them. The barn smouldered behind, a black scar against the hollow. Above, the stars flickered faintly, cold and distant, as though indifferent to the suffering below. But in the sisters' eyes burned something brighter than the fire that had tried to consume them, a resolve forged in loss, in fury, and in love. The hollow had tested them, and though scarred, they remained unbroken. The morning after the fire was grey and heavy, smoke still drifting in thin ribbons from the charred remains of the barn. The Whitmore sisters stood before the ruin, their faces worn, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. Yet beneath the fatigue lay something stronger, a question that could no longer be ignored. Caroline broke the silence first, her voice raw but resolute. "We can't keep hiding." The fire proved it. "They'll never stop until the well is laid bare." Martha's gaze lingered on the blackened beams, her jaw tight. "And when it is? When they see what lies at the bottom, will they stop then? Or will they condemn us more fiercely?" "They already condemn us," Caroline snapped, her eyes blazing. "At least if we bring the truth ourselves, they'll see we're not afraid." Eliza stepped between them, her hands trembling as she clutched her cross. "Both of you are right, but both of you are blind as well. Truth is not ours to twist or bury. It belongs to God alone. If He wills it revealed, then it must be." Martha turned sharply, her voice cutting. "And what if His will destroys us? Will you still call it justice?" Eliza's eyes filled with tears, but her voice steadied. "Better destroyed by truth than consumed by lies." The words struck Martha deep. For years, she had borne the burden of protecting her sisters, shielding them from hunger, from gossip, from the harshness of the land. But in her heart she knew she was also shielding herself. Shielding from the shame of their father's silence, from the fear that the well was more than rumor. Later that day, as the smoke cleared and the valley quieted, Martha walked alone to the well. She stood at its edge, staring into the blackness below. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint echoes like voices long buried. She closed her eyes and saw her father's face, weary and lined, the way he would look toward the well with something like dread. Caroline's voice startled her. "You're thinking of him, aren't you?" Martha turned to see her youngest sister standing behind her, eyes sharp, hands clenched at her sides. "He knew," Caroline said bitterly. "He must have." "And he chose silence." Martha's voice broke, softer than she intended. "Perhaps he thought silence would keep us safe." Caroline shook her head. "It didn't. It cursed us instead." For a long moment they stood together, the weight of their father's choices pressing between them. Finally, Caroline reached out, her voice firm. "We end it, Martha. No more secrets. No more silence." That evening the sisters gathered inside the cabin. The fire cast warm light across their faces, though the air was heavy with decision. Martha looked at Eliza and Caroline, her heart torn, but her resolve forming like iron. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we do it together. Not for the town, not for Hale, but for us. For the truth." Eliza nodded, her eyes wet but shining. "For peace." Caroline's lips curled into a determined smile. "For freedom." Martha breathed deeply, the weight of years pressing down, and then, slowly, lifting. "Then it is decided. Tomorrow we face it. In the light of day, before them all, the truth will rise." Silence followed, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of resolve, heavy yet unshakable. The sisters sat close, bound by the knowledge that whatever came next would change everything. Outside, the mountains loomed, eternal witnesses to their choice. And in the valley hollow, the well waited, dark and patient, its secrets ready at last to be drawn into the light. The morning broke cold and clear, a pale sun climbing over the ridges, its light sharp on the frost-covered ground. The Whitmore sisters stood side by side at the edge of their land, their breath rising in clouds, their faces solemn. Behind them, townsfolk gathered, drawn by whispers of what would be revealed. Some came with suspicion, others with grim curiosity, but all carried the hunger for truth. Reverend Hale stood at the front of the crowd, his expression unreadable. His hands rested on his Bible, his dark eyes fixed on Martha as though daring her to falter. Martha met his gaze steadily, though her chest trembled with the weight of what they were about to do. She turned to her sisters. "This is our moment. No turning back." Caroline gripped the rope, her jaw set. "Then let's end it." Eliza's hands trembled as she clasped her cross, whispering, "Lord, give us strength." With practiced hands, they lowered the rope into the well, the pulley creaking as the bucket descended into the dark. When it rose again, the crowd leaned forward. Gasps erupted as the sisters pulled into daylight what no one could deny. Bones weathered and pale, tangled remnants of forgotten lives. A skull rolled free, its hollow socket staring up at the sky. The murmurs turned to shouts. "Mercy of God!" cried one woman. "It's true!" Martha steadied her voice, raising it above the din. "These are not beasts. These are people. And they have lain hidden far too long." Caroline and Eliza worked the rope again, pulling up more. One by one the remains surfaced. Ribs, femurs, skulls, brittle cloth, clinging still to fragments of bone. When the last bundle was laid out upon the ground, the count reached 19. Men, women and children, their stories lost but their presence undeniable. The crowd fell into uneasy silence, broken only by the caw of a crow circling above. The weight of 19 souls hung over them all. Eliza stepped forward, her voice breaking but strong. These were God's children, no less than us. They were cast away, denied rest. Today we give them back their dignity. Some townsfolk bowed their heads, others crossed themselves. The murmurs shifted, suspicion turning to unease, guilt rising like smoke. Reverend Hale cleared his throat, his voice carrying over the assembly. "This land has harbored wickedness. Though these sisters did not cast the bones here, they bear the burden of what lies within their borders. It is a curse upon the valley." Caroline shot him a glare, her voice fierce. "You call it curse because it gives you power. These people were not taken by us nor by our father. They were cast down here long before. And if this valley is cursed, it is by the silence of men who looked away." Murmurs rippled again, sharper now, directed less at the sisters and more at Hale himself. Old men shifted uncomfortably, women exchanged wary glances. Councilman Jameson stepped forward, his face grave. "If these bones are as old as they seem, then guilt lies with generations past. The Whitmores carry the burden of discovery, not the crime itself." The tension broke into argument among the townsfolk, voices clashing in the crisp air. Some still cast blame at the sisters, but others muttered of old feuds, of ancestors who may have hidden sins best forgotten. Martha stood firm, her voice cutting through the noise. 19 souls lay beneath us. Today they rise to the light. Judge us if you must, but know this: truth will not be buried again. The crowd quieted. Even Hale, his authority cracked, said nothing more. As the townsfolk dispersed, the sisters remained by the well, their hands clasped together. The bones lay waiting for burial, but something heavier than earth had been lifted. For the first time, the valley seemed to breathe freely, as though the mountains themselves had been waiting for this reckoning. Yet Martha knew their fight was not ended. Truth was revealed, but scars remained, and the final choice still lay ahead. The 19 skeletons were laid to rest on a cold morning, the ground damp beneath the shovels, as the town gathered in uneasy silence. A patch of consecrated soil near the church became their final home. Men dug in grim labor, women whispered prayers, and children clutched their mothers' skirts, eyes wide at the sight of bones carried in linen shrouds. The Whitmore sisters stood apart, their hands clasped, watching as each bundle disappeared into the earth. Eliza's lips moved with every prayer spoken, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Rest now, all of you. May the Lord grant you peace at last." Caroline's gaze burned with unflinching defiance. Though grief shone in her eyes, she seemed to dare the town to look away from what they had ignored for so long. Martha stood between them, silent but resolute, her heart heavy yet strangely lighter than it had been in years. When the last grave was filled, Reverend Hale stepped forward to speak, but the crowd no longer bent wholly to his voice. His sermons of curses and wrath rang thinner now, overshadowed by the undeniable truth of what had been uncovered. Councilman Jameson, weathered and stern, placed a hand upon Hale's arm and said aloud, "Let the dead rest. Let no more judgment fall upon the living who brought them into the light." The people nodded, some grudging, others with genuine relief. The Whitmores were not embraced, not fully, But something in the air had shifted. Suspicion no longer pressed quite so heavily. Respect, reluctant, fragile but real, had taken its place. Back at the farm, the sisters walked the scarred land. The barn stood as blackened ruin, the fields half barren, the cabin weary from years of storms. Yet for the first time, it felt like theirs without the weight of silence pressing down. Carolyn broke the quiet, her voice steady. "We did it. They can never deny it now. Those voices are heard." Martha looked at her youngest sister with pride hidden beneath her sternness. "You risked your life, but you were right. The truth had to rise." Eliza's eyes glistened. "And now maybe God will bless this land again. Maybe we can heal." Martha touched her shoulder gently, a rare tenderness softening her tone. "We'll heal because we chose it, Eliza. Not because the Reverend told us, not because the town demanded it, but because we stood together." That night the three sat by the hearth, the flames dancing low. The silence between them was no longer heavy with fear, but filled with quiet strength. They spoke of their future, how to rebuild the barn, how to sow the fields again come spring, how to endure. Caroline dreamed aloud of one day telling their story beyond the mountains, of making sure the 19 souls were never forgotten. Martha listened, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Eliza hummed a hymn, her voice soft, carrying through the cabin like a balm. Outside, the well was sealed with stone and timber, its dark mouth closed at last. Yet its echo would remain in the valley, a reminder of what had been hidden and what had finally come to light. The Whitmore sisters knew scars would remain, on the land, in the town, within themselves. But scars told stories, and stories gave strength. Their father had once said the mountains kept secrets. Now, because of them, one secret had been broken open, and the hollow itself seemed freer for it. The wind swept through the valley, not with menace but with promise, carrying forward the lasting echo of 19 forgotten souls and the defiant strength of the 3 who gave them back their names. If this story held you until the end, I invite you now. Subscribe to the channel for more tales like this one, where truth rises from shadow. And don't stop here. Click on the video suggested on your screen to continue exploring the mysteries of history that still echo today.